Good morning, good morning. Today is actually morning. I actually have my green tea right here. And welcome to lecture 2 of the retention series. This lecture is titled, What Happens When You Don't Have User Retention? It's continuing from last week, talking about why retention is awesome, but we didn't talk about what are the other options. So what if you have growth and your competitors don't? Or what if you have more VC money, therefore you have a bigger war chest and your competitors don't? Won't you still win? And usually those arguments are well-founded. So they come from some of the smartest people in Silicon Valley. In fact, there's this famous essay by Paul Graham, who is the founder of Y Combinator. It is titled Startup Equals Growth. There's also this famous book by Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of LinkedIn, titled Blitzscaling. And basically it talks about how the secret of all these companies that became huge is that they grew hyper fast and their competitors didn't. So the case for growth is not coming from dummies, is what I'm trying to say. But then you might say, if these older, more experienced people are preaching growth, how can I contradict their advice? And before I answer that, I actually want to steelman their views. I do recommend you read Paul Graham's essay, but the basic gist is right around here, where they advise YC startups to pick a growth rate that they think they can hit every week. And a good growth rate is here 5 to 7%. And if you can hit 10% or more, then you are doing exceptionally well. And the reason is that it filters out every decision. Should you hire another programmer? Should you go to a conference? Should you add a feature? And the answer is yes, only if it helps you hit that target growth rate. And it's a great compass. In fact, I believe his strongest point in the essay is this one. I'll just read the whole thing, where you can use the need for growth as a form of evolutionary pressure. So if you start out with some initial plan and you modify it as necessary to keep hitting 10% weekly growth, you may end up with a quite different company than you meant to start. But anything that grows consistently at 10% a week is almost certainly a better idea than you started with. When I read that, it excites me. In fact, it is so great, and I love it so much, that I added it as the first feature in Aizen, which I showed you last week. Now, once I scroll down, I can see how many people do I have to reach to get that 5% weekly growth rate, and how many do I have to reach to get that 10% plus exceptional growth rate. In fact, I'm actually considering doing 52 weeks of growth after doing the 52 weeks of retention. But there's the rub. Notice how I said growth comes after retention. Let's take a look at what happens when you try to follow all of this great advice, but you don't have retention. And by the way, before I show these examples, I just want to remind that first and foremost, I'm speaking from experience. Last week, I showed you the graph of my top startup and what happened when I focused on growth without focusing on retention. And I'm lucky because at least the product is still alive. The reason for that is because I never raised VC money. But had I raised venture capital, this business would be dead by now. So in Silicon Valley, one of the top cautionary tales is HomeJoy. And they were this home cleaning service. They raised $38 million. Paul Graham himself, who wrote Startup Equals Growth, tweeted their revenue growth graph and said that it's the fastest growing company of all the companies they founded at YC at the time. So here's an example where they had the growth, they had the VC money, and yet 19 months later, they shut down. What happened, you may ask? There's this Forbes article that goes into it, and you may read it if you want. But the basic gist is right here. Only about 15 to 20% of HomeJoy customers booked again, whereas their competitors had a 35 to 45% retention rate. There you have it. They had the money, they had the growth, more growth than anyone else, and yet without retention, none of that mattered. And there are plenty of other examples of this. You can look them up. Fab, Branch Out, Vidi, the 2024-2025 AI wave, where you saw all these products that grew hyper fast and then just died afterwards. But you get the point. And by the way, the top growth people already know this. Sean Ellis, who actually, funny enough, coined the term growth hacking, wrote this book called Hacking Growth. And the first part of the book is this test he created to decide whether or not a product is even ready to grow. And the whole test is based on a retention question. We'll learn about it later, maybe the next lecture or the one after. This is a great book, by the way, and I recommend it. Another example is this guy, Shamath Palihapitiya, who ran the early growth team at Facebook. They're the guys who basically took Facebook to 1 billion users. And he talks about it in this video, which I also recommend. Again, all these resources will be in the show notes. In the video, he has this great quote where he describes basically banning the topic of growth and virality. So he says, in his words, "What I want to hear about is the 3 most difficult and hard problems that any consumer product has to deal with. How do you get people in the front? How do you get them to an aha moment as quickly as possible? How do you deliver core product value as often as possible? And after all of that is said and done, only then can you propose to me how are you going to get people to get more people." And by the way, if you don't understand these terms like the aha moment, he's basically describing the retention funnel. So how do you get people in the front? How do you get them to an aha moment? I don't love the term aha moment, so I just call it the value moment. But it's basically when people experience the value of your product. And then the third point he said is how do you deliver core product value as often as possible? And that's basically habit. So again, ran growth at Facebook. He's basically describing retention before focusing on the hyper growth and virality that everyone is chasing. And you might say, Facebook, like that was over a decade ago, like times are different now. Now we have AI and blah, blah. So I was listening to this interview on Lenny's podcast with Amo Avasari. I hope I'm saying that right. And what I found fascinating in this interview with the head of growth at Anthropic, which, side note, is the fastest growing company of all time, is how much of the interview he spends talking about retention topics. So, take a shot every time he says activation, onboarding, sign up flow, reducing friction, time to value. I don't know about you, but when I heard head of growth, I was expecting some crazy SEO strategy or some social media strategy or some crazy like automated ad strategy. And by the way, don't worry if terms like activation and acquisition aren't clear to you yet. We will learn all of that during this course. But the point I'm trying to make is even the top growth people don't really separate growth from retention. To them, it's one thing. And that is how I want you to think about it as well. And by the way, in Paul Graham and Reid Hoffman's defense, they don't disagree either. You just have to read the fine print. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom of Startup Eco's Growth, in note 7, he says, beware too of the edge case where something spreads rapidly, but the churn is high as well, so that you have good growth until you run through all the users, at which point the growth stops. And basically what he's describing here, this edge case, is Homejoy, it's Fab, it's Branch Out, Vidi, blah, blah, blah. And in Blitzscaling, the Bible on hypergrowth, Reid Hoffman says, if your distribution strategy focuses on virality, you also have to focus on retention. Bringing new users in through the front door doesn't help you grow if they immediately turn around and leave. So when you're sitting there thinking about growing your product and you catch yourself saying, man, if I could just get one Mr. Beast mention in one of his videos, I'd totally make it. Or if I could go viral on TikTok, you're wrong. Unless you have awesome retention. Because what would happen is you would get a flood of visitors and the chart would look spectacular. But if your product does not bring people back, none of it matters. None of it. And actually, we have two real-world versions of that experiment. So in 2015, Jay-Z bought this music streaming service called Tidal. And this is when he launched it on stage with 16 of the biggest artists in the world at the time. So you had like Jay-Z, and you had Kanye West, and you had Rihanna, Beyonce, Madonna. And yet, 6 years later, Square acquired a majority stake for $297 million. And although that sounds great, everything is relative. And in this case, it's relative to its number one competitor, Spotify, which launched with, I believe, 0 celebrities on stage and is worth $103 billion as of this recording. Another example is this 2013 app, which was launched by, I believe it was Justin Bieber's best friend, and he got Bieber to invest in it and promote it to all of his Instagram followers. It was called Shots of Me, and it was basically a selfie app, so Instagram, but just selfies. And because users were not sticking around, 2 years later, they shut the app because the founder said it was, quote, bleeding. To illustrate this for you, I have created a very scientific representation of this phenomenon. This is a savanna, and we'll start a fire right in the middle of it. Notice how the fire grows really quickly. And if you pay attention, you'll notice that each frame has more fire than the one before it. So this looks really impressive. There's a lot happening. The fire's growing rapidly. But then you get to the last frame and it's just all burned. There's no fire, no savanna, nothing. Dead. And this is basically a growth chart with no retention. So if you look again, you have these users and it's growing really fast, and you have more users this month than last month, and it's crazy. But in the end, it's just dead if you have no retention. And I just wanted to create this so that I could really burn this visual into your mind. Burn. By the way, I didn't come up with this example. I remember I watched a lecture on YouTube and the guy showed this example, but I couldn't find the actual lecture. And I've searched everywhere for it. I think it was a Y Combinator lecture, maybe at Stanford. If you can find it, I would be super grateful. I want to link to it and attribute it properly. Okay, so I've beaten into you the idea that retention matters, but why? So there's this awesome blog post by Brian Balfour, who ran Reforge, which is an awesome resource on this topic, by the way. They have these awesome courses and blog posts. This article is titled "The One Growth Metric That Moves Acquisition, Monetization, and Virality." And obviously, you know that's retention. It goes into a lot more detail, so I recommend reading the whole thing. But the basic gist is, if you have more retention, you have more users. And if you have more users, those users are going to invite more friends. They're going to mention you in conversations and social media. They'll create more content that search engines will index. So more users equals more growth. Every acquisition loop that you can name will be powered by people who stuck around long enough to feed that acquisition loop. And the second basic point is that more retention equals more money. In very simple terms, if you have a user, the user is paying you $10 a month. If they're just around for 1 month, you get $10. If they're around for a year, you get $120. And then that money will cascade downstream to everything else. If a user gets you $120 over the lifetime that they use your product, then a user for you is more valuable. Therefore, you can spend more money on things like ads. And if you can spend more money in ads than your competitors, then you can outbid them in those channels. So you basically kick them out from those growth options. Again, the basic gist of this blog post is that more retention leads to more users, and more retention leads to more money. And notice that number 2 also feeds back into number 1. So the more money you have, the more users you can acquire. The more users you have, the more money you're going to have, round and round. And this just compounds the whole way. And again, I feel this in my own world. I would love to run ads for Mental Math Pro, But because I know the numbers, I know that I cannot do that profitably just yet. So that blocks me out of one growth channel, which isn't great, especially if my competitors can use that channel. So I want to make that concrete with a very small, simple example. Let's imagine that you make $1,000 a month with your product and your competitor makes $2,000 a month, twice as much. So you think, okay, they're going to win. That's it. Twice as much is a lot. But let's introduce a second variable. You have 85% retention and they have 65% retention. So you keep 85% of the money you make, they keep 65%. So things look dire for the first year, right? Because they're always going to make more money than you. Like twice as much is quite a lot. But something happens right around month 12, so a year later, where suddenly now you're making more money than them. Even though you still have $1,000 MRR and they have $2,000 MRR. And from there, they will never catch you again. Around month 36, you're making more than $1,000 than them. Even though your MRR is still 1,000 and their MRR is still 2,000, ceteris paribus, your higher retention is the deciding factor. And here's the kicker. So this obviously super simple model understates your advantage because it ignores the other things that we talked about. So like the word of mouth, you have more users, more lifetime value per user, the ad channels that your higher retention unlocks. In real life, you're not just going to like edge them out, you're totally going to lap them. And in fact, in that Shamath Palihapitiya video that I referenced earlier, which I recommend you watch, he says this quote: "We knew we were going to beat MySpace when we had like 45 million users and they had 150 million. More than 3 times as much." And how did they know? Remember at the beginning of the video, he says that he wanted to focus first and foremost on retention before virality. There you go. And I want to end on this hopeful note for some of us, because one of the big worries nowadays is the AI labs coming after you and copying your product. So we see this with how Anthropic really hurt Cursor when they launched Claude Code. We see this with OpenAI really hurting Perplexity once they launched web search in ChatGPT. And there's this whole meme of the labs just killing 1,000 startups every time they launch a new feature. It's very reminiscent of when Facebook went after Snapchat by copying Stories. Stories was a Snapchat feature at first, and Facebook decided to copy it, and they added it to Instagram. And as TechCrunch put it, Snapchat growth slowed 82% after Instagram Stories launched. So this is your biggest fear, right? As a product builder, as a founder, what if the big guys come after me? But we forget that Facebook also copied all these other products, right? So they went after Pinterest with Facebook Save, and Craigslist and eBay with Marketplace, and Facebook fundraisers went after GoFundMe, and Facebook Watch went after YouTube. But in every single one of these cases, Facebook was not able to hurt these competitors as much as they hurt Snapchat. And the reason is all of these retain their users better than the Facebook version does. To summarize it, retention is the moat that is not going to show up in a feature comparison chart. The way that I like to think about it is it's a bit like a video game. Level 1 is get the retention right, like build a good product that people come back to. And then level 2 is the crazy growth, blitzscaling, fun game. Although in practice, it's a lot less like a switch. It's more like 2 sliders on a mixing board, right? I was talking to a friend about my lecture from last week, and she said, yeah, but how can I focus on retention if I don't even have users? This is why the slider metaphor is helpful. Early on, you want to focus something like 90% on retention and get just enough growth to get users so that you can get that feedback to improve your retention. But don't focus on the hypergrowth just yet. As your retention improves, you gradually slide one down and you slide the other one up. And there's an extreme version of me that wants to say like, okay, you focus 100% on one and 100% on the other. But even if your retention is stable, that could erode over time, right? So like if a competitor launches something better, these things could decrease your retention over time. So even Amazon, which I showed last week, has insane levels of retention, still has teams dedicated to increasing it year after year. And if you look at Aizen, I have this cool little feature that shows what I should focus on at that point in time. So with Mental Math Pro, you can see that 1,000 people visit, but only 29 create an account. So I have to solve something either with the product or with the landing pages. But then when you look at a much better product, such as BetterLink, you can see that the focus should be on growth and getting more people to visit the site because the retention is pretty decent. And by the way, I owe you a little housekeeping, which is 2 lectures in and I haven't showed you yet a single retention cohort chart or retention graph. That is deliberate because I'm trying to build it step by step. We will get to those charts, but every cohort chart starts with a single cohort, right? So that's where we'll start. And then we will work on combining them as time goes on. In fact, next week we'll go a step back even before the first cohort and we'll look at how do you find an idea for a product that people want in the first place. So I hope to see you there and I hope you have the absolute best day.